Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Wright, and I'm a litigation associate at Winston & Strawn in their Dallas office. And I am thrilled to welcome you on behalf of DAYL's Lawyers Promoting Diversity Committee to our program for today, A Seat at the Table, moving from diversity to inclusion. Now, for those of you who may have attended Dinner and Dialogue earlier this summer, you may recall that we focused on building the diversity pipeline and understanding whether we've really made that much progress. This conversation now shifts from looking at diversity in the form of recruitment to true inclusion so that organizations and law firms can retain their diverse talent. I am thrilled to have these three individuals serve as our panelists because each of them I have a connection to in some way throughout my legal career. So I'm excited for what they have to share with you. The CLE credit code will be entered into the chat during the program and at the end, so you will find that information there. And as we go along, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A section and I will try to incorporate them as we go, but we'll also incorporate some time at the end for any additional lingering questions that you may have, because I'm sure there will be some. So without further ado, I would like to jump in and introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Katrina H., and she is a partner at Winston & Strawn here in the Dallas office and also serves as one of my mentors, where she concentrates her practice on complex commercial, class action, and intellectual property litigation. She also has extensive experience defending and advising direct selling in multi-level companies and often writes blogs and gives presentations advising these organizations of FTC regulations and compliance issues. Recently, she was named to Benchmark Litigation's Under 40 Hot List and Best Lawyers 2021 Ones to Watch. Welcome, Katrina. We also have Gabe Vasquez, who is the Vice President and Associate General Counsel for Operations for Vistra Corporation, a premier integrated power company based in Irving, Texas, where he is responsible for managing and supporting the day-to-day legal operations of Vistra and its national retail energy businesses. In addition to his responsibilities at Vistra, Gabe serves as a trustee of the Dallas Bar Foundation, a community law fellow at SMU Dedman School of Law, and as a board member of Jesuit College Preparatory School of Dallas Alumni Association. Welcome, Gabe. And then certainly last but not least, we have Aida Babalola, who is the Senior Legal Director of Global Employment Law at PepsiCo, where she provides employment law advice and counsel to the company's corporate and global client groups. In addition to her day-to-day role, she also serves as legal counsel to the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion function of the company. She is a member of the New Roundtable, serves on the steering committee of the National Employment Law Council's in-house Career Accelerator program, and participates in formal mentoring programs, among other things. Most recently, she was named to the Association of Corporate Counsel's 2021 Top 10 30-somethings list. Welcome, Aida. And so I'm actually going to start with Aida with our first question. So tell our attendees, how did you get where you are today? Was your path linear or were there some twists and turns along the way?
Yeah, so, I'll start off by saying really excited to be here. Looking forward to this discussion. So I'll give you the, I don't know if it's the long version or the short version. Actually, I'll just give you the version. So I'm first gen, born in the States. My parents are immigrants from Ethiopia. I was born and raised in Houston. And I share that to say, we didn't really have much experience with going to school in the States or working in corporate America. We didn't know any lawyers here, anything like that. So, I was a bit of a guinea pig. We were kind of learning it and figuring it out as we went. And what that means is I got by a lot of the time on the grace of good mentors, right? So I went to UNT undergrad. I went to SMU Law School because I wanted to be in the Dallas area. Didn't want to be too far away from my family back in Houston. And I remember just right before starting law school, my mom, who was a nurse at the time, she was talking with one of her patients and told her, my daughter's going to law school. We're really nervous about this. We don't know what to expect. And the patient was like, it's really expensive. She's going to be in a lot of debt. You have to know people. So my mom just freaked out. And I just said, this is what we've been working towards my entire life, pretty much. I was one of those odd ducks that had kind of always wanted to be a lawyer. And so we just got to do what we can and step out on faith and hope that it all works out. And it did. I met mentors in law school that helped me figure out how to navigate law school. I met mentors through different formal mentoring programs that helped prep me for interviews for diversity scholarships, which helped me to pay for law school. I met mentors at the 2 firms that I worked at prior to coming to PepsiCo, who helped me navigate life as a new lawyer. And then I've got a ton of mentors now at PepsiCo that helped me, to figure out this transition to in-house. And then what it's just like to be a working mom. So, I guess it's somewhat of a linear path, and that I just went school, firm, in-house. But along the way, kind of navigating that, I really give a lot of that credit to the people who are just, willing to pick up the phone or answer the email to help me out, really out of the goodness of their hearts.
I love that. And we'll definitely dig into some mentorship tips a little bit later. But Katrina, what about you? What was your path like to get where you are?
Like Aida, so when I was young, my family knew nothing about law. I'm the first lawyer in the family. I didn't even want to be a lawyer. I had no idea what it took to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a journalist. And while I was going through journalism school, one of my teachers, one of my mentors was like, hey, you're really good at this journalism law thing. You might want to think about expanding a little bit. And then when I started working in journalism after undergrad at UNT, I, said, I don't really love journalism. So what's next for me? And I decided on the law. Like I said, my parents knew nothing about the law. The first time that I sat through a seminar that said I had to graduate pretty much in the top 10% of my class to pay off my loans, I went, whoa, what does all this mean? And why? What industry said that? It shocked me that was the industry I was going into. So I rode the coattails of a heck of a lot of really good professorial mentors. And then when I started actually practicing, I had the most amazing judicial clerkship, and my judge is my biggest champion. And then into big law, there have been a lot of champions in big law. There have been a lot of people that I thought would be champions that weren't champions. It takes finding the right people and being intentional about it, or it did for me.
Gabe, what about you? Same question.
Well, this is the fun part about being the third person to answer, because I have some parallels here, but without having known people's backstories, a lot of the same for me. I would say, it's an immigrant story too. I was born and raised in Dallas, so like Aida, I think there's some parallels there. I was the oldest of 4 kids. My dad immigrated from Mexico when he was in his 20s. And so we had a pretty humble background. He was a TV repairman. My mom was a social worker. But they really focused on education, and somehow they put 4 kids through private Catholic school. I don't know how, because I have trouble paying for one right now with different means. But I certainly appreciate it more so than anything else. And I think at the end of the day, some of that firstborn competitiveness and just curiosity allowed me to do well in school. So when I was a Jesuit, I got into what I have trouble with the term elite, but I got into Harvard and Stanford amongst a couple of other schools. Ultimately went to SMU. I say that not from a braggadocio standpoint, because I think that was a really important turning point for me. At the time, I kind of struggled with what I should do. I mean, I certainly felt the pressure externally that, the choice was obvious. But for me, I felt like that was not necessarily the right choice for me. I wanted to stay close to family, which, was important in a Hispanic culture. I certainly had some concern about the finances involved, even with the travel, although I had it largely covered from a financial aid standpoint. I think I still struggle with imposter syndrome back then about really whether I deserved it at the end of the day. And that's part of this discussion here about diversity. And then I just wasn't sure if I felt I would feel included in those places. So while I say I went to SMU, and SMU, while it's made large strides, is still not the most diverse place. I still think they're on their way. It did allow me to go to a great school on a full scholarship, stay close to my family. It was the right choice for me long term. And one of the unique aspects of that experience was it included some time abroad. So I spent my sophomore year abroad in Spain. It was, like most folks, one of the best experiences of my life. I got to meet my wife over there, who is not Spanish. She's actually was from Dallas and just happened to be studying with me over there. So that worked out. But I thought also what was cool about that was it was probably one of the first times in my life that I felt, just kind of this initiation of pride in my culture, right? Because I think there's a very Anglo-centric view of the world, especially when you're growing up as a, person of color or minority in institutions that largely don't represent that. And so that to me was pretty unique. And then I got the opportunity by the end of my undergrad career to think about law school. Again, like Aida, I really had no concept. It was pretty naive working my way through all this. It was just kind of a question of what I could do next. Probably should have asked more questions. Maybe that would have scared me off. But, while it seems linear, it certainly involves a ton of help because I did have a lot of mentorship and sponsorship along the way, including, the school through the Bar Foundation did afford me, thankfully, the opportunity to go on full scholarship to SMU as a Syracuse Hughes Scholar, which I know, Ashley, you share the same fortune. And then that just allowed me to also make an early leave from the law firm, which I loved, and we can talk about that as well. But I got recruited to go in-house pretty early in my career, went to Michael's, the arts and crafts store, and then now I've been 13 years later on the power side. So it feels like the road is fairly straightforward, but there's a lot of help along the way.
I absolutely agree with that. And thank each of you for sharing your stories, because there are a lot of parallels, and I think it will resonate with people on our call today. Now, Gabe, you touched on this a little bit, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper. For years, decades even, there have been conversations about diversifying the legal profession. But as you've kind of navigated your career and reflect on your own experiences with respect to diversity or the lack thereof, in what ways has the profession improved as far as diversifying, and in what areas do we still have work to do? And Katrina, I will start with you on that question. Yeah, you're on mute.
So in thinking about this panel and preparing for it, I reflected upon the fact that I have been practicing now for over a decade, and I have done 3 to 4 panels discussing diversity, either as a moderator or as a panelist, every year for the past 10 years. More than that. That's depressing, in my opinion, because I don't feel like we've gotten very far at all in addressing the key issues that affect diversity, and especially in big law. So I'm going to speak from the big law perspective. Pipeline diversity, maybe a goal, well, no, probably silver star as far as improvement there. We've got a lot more diverse candidates in law schools, not enough, but we're doing better on that front. We're doing abysmal on the hiring front, and even worse on the actual retention front. The problem in big law is that most of these big firms stick to these rubrics of top 5, 10% of their class from a top 50 law school, and they're just not even willing to consider candidates that, that clearly have the fire in the belly and the ability to practice big law. They're not willing to even consider them outside of that rubric. It's a problem, and our hiring is never going to get better until we start looking more holistically at the way we hire in big law. And then retention, we're going to talk about that for the rest of the day, but we have not gotten anywhere near where we need to be on retaining good, diverse, and female attorneys in big law. And a lot of that, I think, is people sticking to antiquated notions of what the practice of law should look like.
Gabe, what do you think? Where have we improved? Where do we need to go?
I'll share some of Katrina's frustrations. It has been a conversation for a long time. Obviously, we've been part of it. Have we gotten better? Marginally. I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot more discussion around it. I think a lot more action is coming from it. I just worry that that this becomes a social fad and not social progress at some point, which is ultimately what we need. It also requires an investment of time, energy, and money. And when you get into the business space, I think that's the hard part. Most of these efforts won't pay off today or even tomorrow. They're going to pay off, years from now. And so that pipeline problem is hard unless there's a real commitment to invest in it. Having been through a lot of the cycle as well, I do share, and this is why I touched on the elitism issue. I think the legal profession, like a lot of these other professions, can be fairly superficial. I think the legal profession is often challenged with the ego. And granted, while what we sell is kind of our mental faculties, which often requires a bit of the ego. At the same time, I think it superficially relies on what school you went to and how you did and all those kinds of things. And I don't necessarily think that makes the smartest lawyers at the end of the day. But it's hard to cut through that. It's hard to cut through some of those stereotypes that I think exist just even in the pipeline, but I'm hopeful we'll make some meaningful progress.
Aida?
Yeah, I'll try not to duplicate what we've talked about already. I do think an area that is helping is technology and social media and the demand for transparency, right? If I think about it from an in-house perspective, you absolutely have this, corporate social responsibility, right? There's almost an expectation, particularly if you're in an industry where you consumer facing, right? Consumer goods, that sort of thing, there's a demand, there's an expectation. And so I think that pressure helps across the board. Do I think we've made progress to where we need to be? No. I think pressure and social media are also a double-edged sword, because I think what ends up happening is some organizations, firms, sub in whatever entity you want to sub in, feel this pressure to rise to the occasion, and then they end up doing things that really end up being performative. And then that contributes to this diversity fatigue, right? People get tired of talking about it. People get tired of actioning against it. You layer on top of that what Gabe mentioned in terms of it has to be a long-term play. It's not something where you're going to see immediate results. And the difficulty, I think, is when people think of diversity, DE&I as a short-term step, as opposed to a continuous journey. Like, you can't ever really let your foot off of the gas. You have to continue going. You have to continue to build momentum, et cetera. When you take your foot off the gas and you hit this lull, it just makes it that much harder to get, started again. But I'm hopeful. I don't know, cautiously optimistic with this new generation that's entering the workplace. I think that, and I say this, it makes me sound like I'm way older than I am. I'm an elder millennial, but I think the generation coming after us is more outspoken. I think they're willing to demand more. They are a bit more educated, just because, again, the internet has opened up ways of information sharing and equipping people to handle situations that, perhaps generations before may not have been prepared to handle. I think about, like, myself, experiences that I had in law school or while I was clerking, or, situations that were obviously unconscious bias, and I didn't know how to respond. It just caught me off guard. And I think about now, with all the experience that I've had and what I've learned, et cetera, I would be in a much different position. I would have a much better response. So I'm hopeful that the generation coming after us will be better equipped.
And I want to dig into that a little bit later, Aida, about just what you think you would have done differently in certain situations. Yeah. But as you also discussed, social media lately, there's been a lot of conversation around inclusion and diversity isn't enough. And you see all of these articles on LinkedIn. And even for myself, scrolling through, I saw someone post this quote. And I'm curious about the panel's thoughts on it. So the quote was that organizations appear to be hiring for diversity, yet managing for assimilation. So I want to understand, Gabe, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that quote in particular?
Sure. And before I forget, I want to know what the cutoff is for elder millennial, Aida, at some point. So that down. I don't know if I qualify, but I'll work it. So on this issue, I think what's tricky about it is I think it kind of goes back to this fatigue issue, right? Where we have to be careful and thoughtful. One of the things I'm most optimistic about, especially being in a corporate context, is I still generally see it as positive that corporations are now engaging in the conversation. It used to be taboo to even touch these kinds of things. I mean, it was, even for me, it's just dangerous ground to go tread on things, you know, to talk about in this space. So the sense now that I feel is that it needs to be, you know, spoken to. And while that doesn't necessarily remove some of the risk associated with it, I think most people perceive that the necessity and the benefits that come from the conversation are more important than hiding behind the risks. So I see that as really important. Now, where organizations take that, you know, I think the challenge is really, you know, just, I mean, I'm always fascinated in kind of the why behind things, and, you know, you can disagree about, you know, some of this stuff, but at the end of the day, you know, to me, it comes down to basic psychology. We're all just more comfortable with sameness. And, you know, it's just a reality. And, you know, I'm more comfortable around, you know, my family, my friends, they're known, they're understood. And the challenge with that is, where does that comfort really become discrimination? I mean, that's a kind of a fine line for me. And the hard part for each of us is that assimilation. I think people think that's a bad thing. It's like you're changing yourself to conform to a norm, right? And if you're in a minority position, then is that you kind of giving up your culture, your identity, whatever it might be, to assimilate? But, you know, I looked at the definition of assimilation. It's actually really defined as the process of taking in and fully understanding information or ideas. So when you think about it in that context, there's nothing wrong with it. It actually needs to be happening more. It's a good thing. And so we just got to move past that, so that this idea that it's not really conformity, it's more about understanding. So a lot of it's going to be nuanced. We'll talk a little about some of these concepts more later, because I think words matter. We all know that as lawyers. But ultimately, I would just say, look, a good soup isn't really just made from one ingredient. We need a lot of pieces in this thing to make it taste good.
I like that. Where does comfort become discrimination? That definitely gives another insightful thing to think about. Aida, what are your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, just thinking through. I mean, I can understand the sentiment, right? I can understand why people might feel that way. I don't think that that's true for every single organization. But I'm sure there probably are organizations where people feel that way, or that is their reality. The way, you know, another metaphor for it, diversity to me has always seemed pretty straightforward, like in terms of the benefit, right? So if I think about, like, if you were going to build a house, you wouldn't want a toolbox filled with just hammers. Like, what are the hammers going to do? You want a toolbox that's got a hammer, that's got a screwdriver, that's got a wrench, I'm not going to go any further into that metaphor because I don't know that many tools, but like, you want a bunch of different tools, right? Because they all serve a different purpose. So when I think about this quote, like managing for assimilation, I think if that is the case at an organization, they're doing themselves a disservice, and they're doing their people a disservice, because even if you have a toolbox that's full of a bunch of different tools, if you're using the wrench as a hammer and using the screwdriver as a hammer and expecting everything to perform as a hammer, you're not really getting the full benefit of the diversity of your tools, right? So that is probably the case. I think it's sad. I think when you're trying to attack a problem, unless you're building a piece of IKEA furniture where all you need is that little L-shaped thing, you want people to come with their full set of experiences. And diversity doesn't just mean racial diversity or gender diversity, or diversity. You could have two people of the same race and the same gender that have very different experiences and backgrounds. So it's probably true. I think it does people a disservice when you do that. In terms of how do you solve for that, right? How do you mitigate that? You have to allow people to, it's not just it's not just having the seat at the table, right? People have to be able to speak. They have to feel comfortable to be able to speak. They have to feel like what they're saying is being heard and considered. It doesn't mean that what they're, saying has to be the suggestion that we go with every single time, but people need to feel like they have an equitable kind of playing field and say in how things are going.
I appreciate that metaphor. The former English teacher in me is very proud. That was a great metaphor. Katrina, what about you? What are your thoughts on that quote?
Well, I definitely share both of my co-panelists' views on all of that, and I don't want to repeat any of that. The only thing I would say is, how do you identify those that are seeking assimilation as opposed to actual diverse inclusion and giving someone a seat at the table? I think that might be helpful to some people listening. So one of the things that the terms that I've heard used is polish, and it's been used by a ton of attorneys that I know, older than me typically, to describe, this attorney doesn't have quite the polish that we need to have them at the pitch for this client. And what they're saying is, oh, this client only wants to see Harvard grads, or this attorney likes to joke about her kids' restroom habits or something. I don't know, right? It's meant to say, this attorney does not look like me and have my pedigree, so she or he probably should not be at the table when I'm talking to that client. And that's something I think that young attorneys should look out for. If you hear somebody talking in terms of that, really try to vet what they're saying to you, and what that really means, because it's probably not someone that's going to be your champion or sponsor, and probably should trend away from working with them.
Thank you for that. And a lot of times, you brought up these examples where you can see a lack of inclusion in these organizations. And that lack of inclusion, a lot of times alienates minority candidates, but also women, especially women who have gone on to pursue motherhood, because it makes them feel undervalued or unseen or isolated from the rest of the group. Have any of you ever felt that way? And if so, how did you push forward? Or if you felt that way in the past, what do you think you would have done differently in that moment? And so this is more of an open question, but Aida, I would like to start with you. So
yeah. So short answer, yes. I can think of a couple of different examples. One that I was thinking of earlier was I was attending a CLE and was wearing a suit. Everybody else there was wearing a suit. All of the lawyers were wearing suits. And I was in like the area where you get food, and this lawyer, older white lawyer, just walks up to me with his plate out and just hands me the plate, like for me to take the plate to the back. And I just remember having this like shock moment. And mind you, I'm like a first year lawyer, right? Second year lawyer. And I just remember like having this moment of like, why is he handing me this plate? What is happening right now? And he said something along the lines of like, could you take this or something like that? And I was stunned. So in the moment, I just was like, I don't work here. That was all that I said. And he walked away, and I'm just kind of standing there like face burning. There's so many people standing around me that have witnessed this interaction. Nobody said anything. And in the moment, it was just shock. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't expecting it. In my mind, I'm like, I've done all this work. I've done all the right things. I went to school. I worked hard. I did, But still, at the end of the day, like this unconscious bias made me feel this particular way. If I had to go back now, right, and if this experience happened to me, I think I would be a lot more. I wouldn't be nasty about it. I wouldn't be rude about it. But I would have been a lot more confident in my response, right? I might have even made a joke about it. Like, oh, I don't know. When you find out, you let me know. Like something I would have handled it more confidently, and I wouldn't have let it make me feel the way that it did at that time, because I carried that for a while, and it hurt. And now that I'm older and more experienced, what I recognize is that is not any indication related to me. That has nothing to do with me. That's based on his experiences. That's based on, he might have been a very nice man for all that I know, but that's based on his unconscious bias. That has nothing to do with my value, what I bring to the table. There's nothing that I should have done differently to have avoided that. That would be the advice that I would give myself, and to anybody on the call that's experienced something similar. Don't let that indicate to you that there's something wrong with you, or that you've done something wrong, or you should have done something to avoid that, because that's not on you.
And before I move on, we have a question that came through the chat. And of course, anyone on the panel is also able to answer this as we move along. But along the lines of allyship, Aida, how would it have helped had someone else said something? Would it have helped? And what do you wish they would have said in defense at that moment?
Yeah, that one's hard. I don't know what I wanted somebody. I would have at least like wanted someone to come up afterwards and just be like, man, I hate that happened. I'm sorry that happened, or something, just to acknowledge that this happened. I don't know that they would have had a response for him in that moment. But certainly the allyship, being an upstander, makes a difference. It makes a difference to the person that's experiencing the scenario, right? Because it shows support. It makes a difference to the other people that are watching this, because essentially you're saying to them, this was not okay. And maybe it emboldens those people the next time that they see something like that to speak up. And to the person who made, the comment, whether they did it intentionally, whatever, it's also sending a message to them that it's not okay. So yeah, it would have been great. I would have appreciated it a lot. And I keep that in mind now. I hope you all will keep that in mind as well. Anytime that you see somebody doing something like that, it doesn't take much for you to diffuse the situation, or, move on to change the topic, or show some support for the person that went through that.
And Katrina, I'd like to move on to you, and you can feel free to add to that secondary question as well. But have you ever felt, unseen, undervalued because of lack of inclusion in the firm?
Yeah, undervalued. And I think one concrete example, I once had a speaking opportunity at a hearing taken away from me because of the way my hair was done. That was not by somebody that I was actually in my firm. So it literally told that I should not wear my hair curly. Anyway, the way I reacted to it now makes me angry and makes me angry. I sat there and said, thank you for the constructive criticism at the time. And I was a 5th-year attorney, and I thanked the person who said that to me for constructive criticism after they pulled a speaking opportunity from me. And I'm still disgusted that I did that. And I like Aida, I don't know how I wish I had reacted differently. And I think I would now, but I'm just not sure if I would. And I don't want anyone to ever have to go through that again. And I want to empower anybody who is facing that to speak up. And another thing is, like Aida, there were others that knew it happened and they watched it happen. And that's where the ally comes in, and they should have been there and they weren't. So yeah, we've got to speak up for one another. I do agree with that. And we have to take control of it too. I didn't. I think I would now, but we should take control of situations like that.
Gabe, any examples that you can think of from your experience?
I'll probably just more speak to it generally, because I definitely think the experiences that were raised, I felt, there's the concept of microaggression that we probably all heard. I don't know how I feel about the term itself, but I think it's pervasive. It's this concept that there are actions that folks take, direct or indirect, that make us feel somewhat undervalued, as we just said, as well as, even more powerfully, shame, right? And I think that's the hard part, really. As one grows up, and especially trying to find their own way, we all want to belong, right? We all want to fit in, and that can at times be a challenge when you're not as represented as what you see around you. So where does that line of confidence and this sense of one's self-worth actually come into play versus the shame that sometimes I think is more controlling mechanism that the world uses. So I think I've had those occasions where I was mistaken for the help. And I think you have to show up a lot of times where, it does feel like you have to, without a chip on your shoulder, because that's not my MO anyways, but how you need to present yourself. I think that in itself can become a challenge, because you don't want to come back to this concept of conformity. I need to look like you in order to be like you, right? And so finding that fine line is something that I think all of us struggle with on the diverse side. But ultimately, I think really what it comes down to is civility. I don't think we win by shaming the person in that concept, right? I just, shame begets more shame actually doesn't lead to a positive result. I think that concept is really hurtful. It's probably more important that somebody else at least recognize that there that it wasn't funny or that it hurt. Because then I think, the times I've experienced it, I felt more shame in the silence. And, like we just said, probably just took one person, or for me, frankly, to have the courage to speak up on, behalf of somebody else, whether it's to them directly or to the person who said it in a civil way. I think that can help slowly change actions and really, maybe that potentially affects motives down the road, but, we're not probably going to change that person in that moment. They're maybe not even aware of it, but creating that awareness is probably the important thing.
Thank each of you for sharing that, because even as a young lawyer and a person of color, a mom, there are certain things that come up. You always wonder, how should I handle that? So at least hearing your story and knowing that, sometimes it is difficult, but that you can have the courage to speak up is definitely something that gives me hope and confidence. I hope it does for others as well. So we talked about what inclusion does not look like. And for the sake of time, I'm going to combine two questions. And I want to know, what does inclusion actually look like? And what are you doing to implement an inclusive culture in your particular organization? So actually, Gabe, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's an easy answer. It kind of comes back to some of the things I had before. We're all going to have this tribal shortcut to really just judge people who look like us and think, we can trust. And so when you're the minority, that's generally not going to be you. So you have to find a way to get past that. Really, the only way to get past those stereotypes is to have meaningful relationships. So you're going to come back to this issue or this need for mentorship and sponsorship. And that's both ways, right? People in positions of power, which is really kind of where the sponsorship comes from, need to be actually extending the hand as well. So part of this environment that we're all hoping to kind of foster and create here through these conversations and just ongoing progress. But really, there's no shortcut to it. I mean, the only way you're going to get through the superficiality is this understanding. And I think the challenge right now is it's an opinionated world with a lot of shared opinions without a lot of accountability for kind of who stands behind them. So we also need to find a way to kind of move past some of that hate as well. Some of that, I would say, cowardness in the folks that don't actually stand behind the things they say, and look for meaningful relationships that allow us to actually, collectively bring forward some sense of inclusion. Because inclusion doesn't happen. I can do a lot of things by myself, but it's not going to create an inclusive world. I need to be working with others to foster that.
Katrina, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think, Ashley, you probably know the answer to this. My number one feeling for how we actually get to an inclusive state is sponsorship and championship. And I mean, putting action to your words, right? So for me, I think it's those attorneys at the top that are largely white males. Right now, they largely are. Taking the time and having the patience to really sponsor young, diverse, and female associates. And what I mean by that is giving them the chance to actually write the motion and argue it. Giving them the chance to be in front of your client, whether they look like you and talk like you or not. Gabe, Aida, me, I didn't have this massive network of lawyers that I grew up with that is just going to make it easy for me to build a big book of business and stay in big law, right? That's not the way it worked. I need people willing to step up and make those introductions for me and take the time to sponsor me. And I got it. Now, I'm with a good group, so I get what I think good sponsorship looks like. And I hope I'm repeating it now and we can ask Ashley if I am or not, but that's the most important thing for me.
I can certainly say that you are, especially for me personally. I can attest to that. Aida, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the sponsorship piece is huge. It's giving the work to people. It's giving them the opportunity. It's also advocating for that person when they're not in the room, right? It's not just about what you're sharing with that person and telling them and the opportunities when they're not there and you're the voice that represents that person. What are you saying to help that person advance their career? I think at firms, I think this is true for everywhere. I think lawyers, for whatever reason, we don't like to give feedback. Like in terms of like a management relationship, it's just rare. I think maybe it's people in general just don't want the conflict, right? It's easier to just not say anything than to give the constructive feedback. Give the constructive feedback, but do it from a place of love, although that sounds cheesy. I mean, do it with care, do it with empathy. You don't have to be mean or ugly about it. But if you don't give people the feedback and tell them the areas that they need to improve, then what ends up happening is they just keep operating the way that they've been operating. And then 6 years down the road, 7 years down the road, 8 years down the road, they don't have the polish. They're not the right fit. They don't have X, Y, Z. Well, did anybody ever tell them that they needed that? Did anybody ever tell them what they could do to get to that? I think that's huge. It's one of my favorite examples, but I had a mentor when I was at, I'll say it because this is a positive. When I was at Littler, and he gave me feedback about like how I appeared when people were sharing information with me. And he didn't say it in like a mean way. He said it in a way that was so constructive. And the way him telling me that opened my eyes to a perspective that I wasn't even aware of, right? And it wasn't change who you are. It wasn't change your facial. It wasn't anything like that. I won't get into the details. It wasn't anything like that. But it was just a tip for me to think of, to realize, hey, other people's perception of me may be this. And so I need to do X, Y, Z to adjust for that perception. And it made a huge difference for me, huge difference. It was something that I otherwise wouldn't have been aware of. So take those opportunities to provide people with that coaching. Recognize that not everybody is going to receive that coaching well. That's fine. That doesn't mean that you stop doing it, right? It doesn't mean that you give up on giving everybody else feedback just because 1 or 2 people didn't receive it well. I mean, I think from an individual perspective, I think that's it. The only other thing I would add is I am constantly asking myself the question, why, right? What difference does the difference make? When I'm making any like a selection on outside counsel or, staffing a project or whatever, I look at the team and I ask myself, okay, why did I put all of these people on this project? Why did I ask so-and-so to do this? Why didn't I ask so-and-so to do this? Just because I'm a diverse woman of color doesn't mean that I don't have my own unconscious biases. Everybody has unconscious biases, point blank, period. They're unconscious. Like that's the whole thing behind it. So all of us need to be taking steps to make sure that we are being more inclusive and actively working against whatever unconscious biases we may have.
You could give 2 concrete steps to law firms or to those working in-house on how they can create a more inclusive environment. What would those tips be? And Katrina, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So more inclusive environment. I think unfortunately, I'm going to have to come back to, the sponsorship. And that can't be for the organization because I'm not one that ever benefited from the formal sponsors. I just don't think that works. But if the individual attorneys need to take it upon themselves to really get down and dirty, get to know your associate, sponsor them, give them the good work, all that good stuff. So that's number 1. Number 2, I feel like there's large disconnect with regard to what we expect from our diverse and female attorneys as far as recruiting and getting the word out about, the firm's diversity of initiatives and all that good stuff. We spend a heck of a lot of time doing that, and it's a good thing. I'm happy to do it, but it would be nice if the larger firms at least would say, hey, she or he's dedicating 300 hours a year to traveling all over the place to get diverse candidates. Let's give them some billable credit for that so that they are not killing themselves to do both. I think that would be a huge adjustment in big law firms and really help to retain diverse candidates.
Dave, what are your thoughts, especially from an in-house perspective?
Yeah, I think, that's where the rubber meets the road. I think on the one hand, the challenge is, and this is the personal experience part, right? I don't really want it to be token representation. When I was able to hopefully achieve something along the way or won something, I wanted it to be because of the value of what I brought and my own worth, not because of the diversity component necessarily. Now, you just have to balance that with the need for opportunity. So I don't necessarily, put that aside. But I know when I'm sitting across the table from firms that I asked to bring forward, a pitch or an opportunity for some work, I do make it clear that I do expect this, right? It's an expectation of a good firm, of the value of diversity. But there's a balance there, and this is what I struggle with, which is at the end of the day, I don't want it to be just diversity to just be the reason. It really needs to be part of the benefit. And so how do I assess that when they show up? Well, for one, obviously there's the obvious physical clues, like who's showing up, whom, the what, the how. But then I'm really, as best you can tell, right? Because I don't know what their strategy was coming into the meeting. That was behind closed doors. I know they're just reacting to my ask, but I'm looking for how do they back that up, right? I mean, there's the marketing side, which says this is all the stuff we're doing, but who's speaking? How are they supporting that person? I'm done as much digging as I can. I'll keep doing digging into who's getting credit for the work. I know firms are a little bit opaque about that, but at the end of the day, I still want to be supporting, because economics matter, the efforts. And so I think those are important conversations. I think even if you ask the questions and you don't get the answers, at least they know you're asking the questions. So to me, I think that's part of what I can do from the standpoint of using the power of the purse, and being the client to hopefully be somewhat meaningful in this progress.
Aida?
Yeah, I echo the same. We have an outside counsel selection process, and it includes a survey that's modeled after the ABA survey. So any firms that are going to do work for us over, I want to say it's like 25 grand, a certain threshold, they have to complete the survey and they have to have a certain score or above in order to continue to do work for us. And if they don't reach that score, that threshold, then there has to be a special exception granted from the GC, from the very top. And in that survey, one of the things, to Gabe's point, one of the questions that we ask, or what we look for, is not just who the relationship partner is, but who's actually billing hours to the matter, right? And what's the substance of the work that they're doing. And so I think that's the first step is diverse representation. You have to have people there. That's table stakes, right? The next layer to that is making sure that they're not just tokens, right? Making sure you're not just bringing them to the pitch and then we never see them again. Are they actually getting the experience, the exposure, doing the work, et cetera? I think that's key, and that ties into the sponsorship piece as well. I think the other thing, which we've touched on before, is, if you continue to recruit the same way that you always recruit, you're going to get the results that you have been getting thus far. So I think firms really need to think through, what do you actually need to be an excellent lawyer? And a lot of times it's not, it's not the pedigree. Yeah, the education's great. I'm not knocking any of those schools, but that's not the end all be all. High GPA is great, but that's not the end all be all, right? How do you look for people that have grit, that have real world experience that's going to help them know how to talk to clients and know how to talk to juries? And there's a lot of skill sets that you're not going to get just from school and GPA or class load. So it would take work, right, to think through a recruitment model that looks outside of that. But I think it would pay off in dividends, both in the talent that you're getting, but then the diverse perspectives that you're having and the diverse set of lawyers that you're then able to offer up to your clients.
So much of that advice, of course, as posed, was focused on what the organizations kind of look for and the firms look for in order to create this inclusive environment. But in reality, the responsibility is not solely on the organization. And as diverse candidates, there are certain things that we need to be doing in order to also feel included and be included in the different substantive aspects of our work. So what should diverse candidates, young lawyers like myself, what should we be doing to get a seat at the table? What tips do you have for us? And Gabe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things here. It goes back to these concepts we've had of sponsorship, mentorship. You've got to be out there. Now, I say that somewhat reluctantly. Part of the reason I did leave the law firm and made the jump in-house is because I did feel like I didn't feel comfortable with the not having the network, as Katrina said earlier, not having a background that came from that world, where ultimately I might be leaning to my frat boy friends or my country club buddies, neither which existed for me, to bring business to me somewhere down the road. Not to say I should have been afraid of that, but it just didn't feel like it fit me. So I think that was part of that kind of career turn, if you will, for me. And I've loved being in-house in part because I love being part of the business. And I love this concept that now I'm in a place where hopefully and meaningfully I can actually influence, the careers of others to get to the sponsorship piece. That to me is more rewarding than money or titles, and frankly, where I'd rather be. And so on the other side, what does that look like? Well, I think those, you've got to be looking for those meaningful relationships. The only thing I caution you with, because I don't love the salesmanship part also, as well, also wasn't super enthusiastic about the book of business side, is I don't love the cocktail party where, I'm getting the 20-second, like, what do you do? Who are you? And people are trying to impress me in 20 seconds. And I don't feel like I don't like trying to impress people in 20 seconds either. So I generally push away from those. I'm looking for meaningful relationships that happen over time, right? Connections and the opportunity for that sense of caring and belonging in terms of the relationship piece of it. So that comes with time. And so that's the only thing I ask of folks is that, if coming out of this, I get 10 inbounds and say, hey, I'd love to have coffee with you. The reality is I probably am going to have a hard time making 10 coffees, just given the schedule. I also need to figure out how to balance that work with my family, with, trying to help people. So, without saying I'm selective or dissuading it, because I'm not, I think people also have to be patient when you're on the other end to say, you kind of just got to put yourself out there, share your story, and then kind of sit, in some ways push gently, but also push, I think, respectfully, and wait for those relationships to develop over time. And some of that may just be happenstance and, being in the same place at the same time on multiple occasions. Others may be a more direct connection. But the reality is you still got to build, meaningful relationships. And to me, there's no shortcuts around it.
Aida, what do you think?
I like the way that Gabe said you've got to push like patiently or gently, but keep pushing, because I think especially for associates that are earlier on in their practice, look, the truth of the matter is you may not have a lot of leverage. You may not feel comfortable. I saw one of the questions in the Q&A. You may not feel comfortable pushing. You may not feel like you have the power at that point to push. So push in whatever way that you can, right? If that's showing up authentically, whatever that means for you, right? In your dress, in your hair, do that, right? As you get further along in your career and you have more leverage, maybe, after you've just won a big MSJ or, something like that, when you recognize those moments where the tides have shifted a bit and you have some more power, and then use that opportunity to push more. And don't just push on your behalf, right? See when you can push on the behalf of other people as well, like for the greater good. Just because you're, in a great position and you're doing well, et cetera, don't forget everybody else that may not necessarily be in the same shoes. And then I would say don't give up, but don't confuse don't give up with never leave, right? So if you're somewhere and you're pushing and it takes a while or it doesn't happen instantaneously, keep pushing, but then also recognize when you've hit a point where it's not going to change, not right now. And for you, the best thing to do may be to look elsewhere. If that's the case, so be it, right? You've got to do what's best for you. And then in that respect, and then when you start looking elsewhere, try and look for signs of these other, places of work that trend positive, right? So like, what's the average tenure for people that have been there? Do they stay long or is it short? Do you see pictures of people's families in the office or their Zoom offices now? Is there direct representation, right? What does their website say about their DE&I efforts? And then when you go into the interview, ask them questions about what's on their DE&I website. Because if they're really doing the work, somebody should have an answer for you. If it's just, stuff that they're putting out there because it sounds good, you'll be able to tell that too from the response. Tap into your network and see if you can find other people that have previously been at the places that you're looking for and ask them why they left and what the culture was. You've got to do your due diligence, but if you can get in at a place that's at least more open to DE&I, right, or pushing that envelope, then you have a greater likelihood of being able to affect some change there.
Katrina.
So Aida just covered pretty much everything I was going to say. Thank you. I absolutely agree with everything that has been said. From the big law perspective, if you look at it as a linear route and you're trying to find your leverage to be able to build the relationships that you need, what I would recommend if you're in the big law environment is spend those first 2 to 3 years just really focusing on practice. How good of a lawyer can you be, right? And just focus in on making sure that you don't learn anything about practicing law in law school, let's be honest. So get in there, figure out what the practice of law really means. And by that 3rd year, if you focused on that, you will have leverage. You will be able to walk into the managing partner's office and say, Tom, I haven't worked with you on a patent case. I really want to try a patent case with you. What can I help you pitch, right? And you're not going to be, he's not going to look at you askance or anything like that. Not that he would ever do that, but I'm just saying you're going to have the leverage to be able to march into that office and say, I want to work with you. I'm good. I can do it, right? And then you also have the leverage as you move up another 2 or 3 years to start helping out others. I have the leverage to, give Ashley the next MSJ argument we have. I have the leverage to assign depositions where I want to assign them. And what I would also say is I absolutely agree. You're going to identify people that you think are going to be your sponsor and champion, and you're going to try to spend some time building a relationship with them. They're not always going to work. And do not be discouraged if the first person that you think is going to be your sponsor just doesn't work out. Reassess, ask the people that are working in the organization already, hey, what about this person? I notice you hang out with them a lot. Do your families hang out together? Do you go to lunch a lot? Find out what you can from the other associates you're working with, and they will help you identify who's probably going to be your best sponsor fit. And you'll make it through. So.
Such great tips. Now we are almost right at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to ask our final question and just have you guys rapid fire and answer as we get ready to close out the program. So the final question is, what is your hope for the legal profession with respect to diversity and inclusion? And Gabe, we'll go to you and you can just give us a quick rapid fire answer.
Wow, you start with me. Okay. Really my hope is that this moves from conversation to action. I think we're already on that path, but I really want to see it. And some of that is going to take some time to actually see the numbers and the change, but I'm super optimistic about the conversations we've had in the last couple of years and where it's going.
Aida?
I'm not gonna say Gabe's, although that would have been one of mine. I'm gonna choose a different one. I hope that the legal profession starts digging into the pipeline sooner. I hope that the search for diversity and supporting diverse talent starts to shift to like high school and middle school. Once people are in law school, they know that they want to go and be lawyers. We need more people in law school to become lawyers. So I hope we start the pipeline search earlier.
And Katrina?
Mine's also pipeline, but it's more of the perspective of, can we get rid of these insane top 5%, top 10% of the class from the top 20 law schools? Can we start looking more holistically at recruiting? I know we can. Will we? That's my hope, that we will set up these systems or get rid of these antiquated systems and get some new, more holistic recruiting tactics in.
I thoroughly enjoyed this program. I can only speak for myself, but I hope the attendees did as well. And I hope that you take away some of the key points each of our panelists have discussed as we truly try to shift from diversity to inclusion. So thank you, panelists, Katrina, Aida, Gabe, for your willingness to say yes and be with us today. And attendees, please do not forget that the CLE code is in the chat. So make sure you grab that so that you can get your CLE credit. Other than that, thank you on behalf of DAYL's Lawyers Promoting Diversity Committee, and we look forward to seeing you for our next event. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Good afternoon.